Okay. Good evening, members, ladies and gentlemen, members of the public. Welcome to this meeting of City of York Council's Licensing and Regulatory Committee. Scheduled to start at 4 o'clock. I'm afraid we're slightly late on today, Wednesday, the 21st of December, 2022. We have several items on the agenda, and I'm going to start just by moving through the initial items of the agenda. The first one of which, after my welcome, is declarations of interest. So can I ask if any members have got a pecuniary or other registrable interest in the matters before us? No, we're all clear on that. Okay, thank you. In that case, I'm sorry, yes, I'll do with that. Okay, so in that case, I'm recording no declarations of interest. Apologies for absence. I've received in alphabetical order Councillor Hunter, Councillor Looker, and Councillor Norman. I'm not aware of any other absences. Councillor One, I haven't heard from. Councillor Barker, I haven't heard from. Councillor Barker sends apologies. Okay. Right. What about Councillor One? No. Councillor Myers? No. Okay. Well, once we start discussing items, members will have to wait until we conclude that item, assuming they're going to turn up. Okay, so we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of October, which is item 2 on this agenda. And they're at page 3. Are members content that these represent the proceedings on the 4th of October? Agreed? Okay, in which case, I don't know if you've got the minutes ready to sign. Right, okay, I will sign those now. Those are duly signed then. Thank you. We have nobody registered to speak under the public participation item. And in that case, I'm going to move on then to item 4, which is the renewal of a sex establishment licence for the first floor of Ziggy's, which is known as Club 55 at 53 to 55 Micklegate, York. I don't know which of the officers is going to speak on this. Right, this is cool.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a straightforward renewal of a sexual entertainment venue licence. Members probably think it's not 2 minutes since we last dealt with the renewal of this application for this premises. We did it earlier this year. So it's for Club 55 on the first floor of Ziggy's nightclub, 53 to 55 Micklegate. A copy of the application is attached at Annex 1 of the report. A copy of the licence that you're looking to renew is attached at Annex 2, and a copy of their current premises licence, which is issued under the Licensing Act, is attached at Annex 3. There are no objections to this application before members today. Just with regards to one point, on page 24 of the report, with regards to conditions 9 and 14, when this, if members do agree to renew this licence, we will make sure that references to he, she, and male or female are removed and relevant wording put in their place with regards to they, etc. So members have 3 options before them today. So option 1 is grant the renewal of the licence as requested. Option 2, renew the licence with modified additional conditions imposed by the licensing committee. And option 4, refuse the application for renewal on one or more of the discretionary grounds. That's a very brief overview, Chair. Sorry, I turned my microphone off. On page 24, paragraphs 9 and 14.
What's that actually for? Can we get individuals to reports and what is the covering report? Mention them all within there.
Sorry, Councillor Mason, what did you?
Have you got, can I ask, have you got your microphone on, Councillor Mason?
Yeah, it's fine. Next
Yeah.
So condition 9 and condition 14. Condition 9 refers to he, she, and condition 14 refers to male or female.
I think last time we looked at this licence, what we agreed as a committee was to replace all references to he/she with they, and to replace male or female with of any gender.
Yeah. Yes. Can we take it then that the correction that's been outlined by Leslie is agreed by members? Yeah, okay. So we then got to deal with the options for granting or not the renewal of the licence. Does anybody have any objections to renewing the licence as requested? Councillor Millie.
I'm happy to propose option 1, grant renewal of the licence as requested, subject to those, tiny tweaks to the wording of the conditions. There hasn't been any change in any of the conditions of the premise or the licence holder since we last looked at this. It seems like a straightforward renewal, so I'm happy to propose option 1.
I'll second that from the chair. Okay, members in favour? Sorry. Oh. We are voting, so all in favour, please. Right, in which case that's approved. Thank you very much, members. Okay, we move on then to agenda item 5, which is at page 63 in your papers. And that is an application for a private hire operator's licence for the operating premises at 39 Layerthorpe, York. David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This reports to is the determination of an application for a private hire operator's licence. The operating premises will be situated at 39 Layerthorpe at York. The applicant is a gentleman by the name of Christopher Hall, who will be trading as Drive Private Hire. A copy of the application is attached to Annex 1 to this report. The council must determine an application for an operator's licence on its own merits in accordance with the legislative framework, taking into consideration the application form and any supporting documents and relevant information. By way of legislation, the council may require the applicant of the licence to submit as much information as reasonably possible to consider whether a licence should be granted and whether or not any conditions should be attached to that licence. Section 55 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act allows for the grant of an operator's licence and states that the licensing period should remain in force for 5 years or such a lesser period as the council thinks appropriate in the circumstances of the case. Members of this committee determined in February 2021 to issue private hire operators licenses for a maximum of 12 months until such time as the new licensing policy was reviewed, and that policy is currently under review at this present time. I can tell you that the premises has current planning permission for the use of a private hire operation, and the planning permission is attached to Annex 2 to this report. It's currently in operation as 659 taxis, and the applicant is in the process of purchasing the business However, legislation in this case does not allow for the transfer of a private hire operator's licence, and therefore this application is before the committee this evening. Members are asked to determine the application in accordance with section 55. In March 1996, the council adopted the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, and in 2019 we reviewed our licensing policy, which went through the executive in September of 19 and was implemented in October 19. The adoption of the policy and legislation allowed the council to set standard conditions which we attach to private hire operators, and those conditions are attached to Annex 3. The council may also attach such conditions on a private hire operator's licence as they consider reasonably necessary. A private hire operator is defined as a person who, in the course of business, makes provisions for the invitation or acceptance of private hire bookings for private hire vehicles. Mr. Hall, in this case, holds operators' licenses with Hull City Council, Doncaster Council, and City of Wolverhampton Council. As a result of the Deregulation Act of 2015, which amended the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, this allows a person licensed as a private hire operator under section 55 in one district, such as York, to accept a booking in that area, but they may then subcontract that booking to another operator licensed within the York district or within another outlying district. There's a potential in this case that bookings may be subcontracted to an operator out of district to carry out that journey. For the avoidance of any doubt, such practice is considered lawful, and the operator's license should not be considered unfit purely on that basis. Similar situations have arisen in the past, and the council has agreed conditions, additional conditions, which can be found at Annex 4. Members may wish to consider all, some, or modified versions of these conditions in this case. The applicant in this case has undertaken all the relevant criminal record checks and the correct documentation has been applied. Annex 5 provides a map showing the location of the premises, and Annex 6 provides legislation extracts of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act. There's no requirement within the Act for consultation to take place in relation to the application for a private hire driver, vehicle, or operator's licence, and therefore consultation has not taken place in relation to this application. The options available for members are to grant a private hire operator's licence as requested, with the standard and additional conditions attached for a period of 1 year. To grant a private hire operator's licence with modified additional conditions imposed by the licensing committee for a period of 1 year, or to refuse the application, providing the grounds for refusal. Thank you.
Is this a question for David? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This is a transfer.
And went off. It's a transfer from one operator to another. There haven't been any parking issues in relation to the current usage?
We've checked our complaint system for public protection and there's been no parking issues at that location.
Thank you. And paragraph 15 talks, the applicant has other operators in Hull, Doncaster and Wolverhampton. In terms of Hull and Doncaster, we've been working with other councils across Yorkshire. Are they included in that working?
It's the West Yorkshire group that we've been working closely with.
So not in this case?
No. However, most of the councils now are adopting what's called the statutory standards in relation to the DFT.
Right.
But not in this case. We're not aware that we've been working closely with them.
Okay. So drivers from Hull and Doncaster could easily come and work in York as a result of this licence?
Yeah, the guidance under section 55 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act in relation to subcontracting of work would allow for the journeys to be subcontracted outside of district to the operators in Hull and Doncaster.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Millie.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two supplementaries to that. In terms of parking issues, I think this application, the applicant's expecting an increase in the number of drivers and cars. It's not just a straightforward transfer from the, it's not just a change in name on the operator's license. It's actually a change in the name of style of operation, including an increase in the number of drivers. So can any parking issues be foreseen, or does the style of operating mean that there aren't going to be actual cars on the site apart from people actually working as operators on the site?
Yeah, the way that companies now normally operate, and in accordance with the planning permission which is in place at the moment, there would be no customers would be allowed to go to base to obtain a vehicle in this situation. That's in the planning consent, which is attached to the annexes. Normally, in relation to the parking round an operator's premises, we would work closely with that operator to ensure that any drivers that were returning to base, such as paying for base rents or things like that, there was adequate parking. However, in this case, knowing that this operator has provided all the information and the booking system that they will be undertaking, it will be one of those situations where there should be very little return from drivers going to the operating premises.
Thank you. And my other supplementary question was also to do with that out of town drivers. So Councillor Orrell's question was about if this application is approved, will that mean that drivers can come from out of area? If it's refused, can they come from out of area to carry out bookings in York?
The legislation in relation to subcontracting work is with any operator. So a booking with any operator within the York district can be subcontracted out of area under section 55 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act. In this case, it's merely that the operator does hold licenses with Hull, York and Doncaster.
Councillor Wells.
It says that there's 91 plus vehicles. I'm presuming that's across all the Hull, Wolverhampton and everything, or is that in York?
At the moment, 659 taxis is approximately around about 60 vehicles. From speaking to the operator, they are looking at expanding the York operation in relation to undertaking or investing in drivers coming into the York licensing arena, but also looking at drivers from York themselves coming to work for that company. There will be other drivers from outside as well, but the 91 plus would merely be the York at this present time.
Councillor Mason.
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't sure if in the past we'd had a representative of the person applying when it came to these type of hearings, opposed to an officer making a decision, if they'd been invited. I wonder if that had been the case in.
You weren't sure that in the past?
Basically, have we invited the person to come and talk to us, the applicant?
Well, I didn't welcome Mr. Hall personally, but he's in the public gallery there,
Okay.
and he will, I think, be speaking in a few moments when he presents his case.
Okay.
Not that he's got an hour's speech prepared. You haven't, have you, Mr. Hall? But this will be an opportunity for him to speak to us, and then for members to question him.
That's fine. That'll help me later on. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Millie.
Thank you. I have a question about planning approval. Do we usually need to check that there's planning permission in place first, or can planning permission, licensing and planning as separate statutory things run completely separately? Yeah, I'll get to that.
Yeah, the planning permission would have to be provided by the applicant. In this case, there is planning permission which is in force and has been for 21 years on that location. I'm led to believe as well, after 10 years, they can apply for a certificate of lawful use in relation to any planning
Okay.
that's outstanding. So we would take it at this present time that planning consent is actually full and in force.
Okay, so there's two bits of planning permission that are attached in the documents. One of them has a condition that says the development may not be acceptable if exercised by other persons without prior written consent of the local planning authority. And the other planning permission says this permission shall operate only for the benefit of 659 taxis, and the use hereby approved shall terminate at such time as they cease to occupy the premises. Yeah. If it's a transfer.
That's been checked with planning, and apparently it would continue on the certificate of lawful use.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that point, both of you. It's one of those things that you look at it and you think, is that right? But it is right. Thank you very much for that. Okay, any further questions from members? For David? No? In which case, thank you, and we'll go on. And if Mr. Hall wishes to join us at the table and speak briefly about his application and respond to any questions, that will be much appreciated. And I think there may be one thing that Councillor Melly may wish to raise later on. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll come to that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Nice to meet everybody. Just to give you a little bit of comfort around what you brought up with Hull and Doncaster, the two very busy existing operations operating over 1,000 vehicles between the area. We're covering far and wide with contracts with the Yorkshire Ambulance Service, Hull and East Yorkshire's teaching hospitals. We cover a big region now, and part of York was the strategy of covering with them and our existing contracts. It fits in very nicely with what we do, and there's a big transfer of work between Hull and York already. There's quite a lot of Hull residents work in York and vice versa. So for us, it was a strategic move was coming over here. We have no intention of flooding the market with Hull and Doncaster drivers. They're busy enough where they live in Hull and Doncaster. It just provides that, you know, the driver drops at York Station, he could do a job in York, or he could take a job back from York back to his local region. We did apply for a Wolverhampton licence. We approached Hull City Council on a number of occasions to say, this was pre-COVID, there's a number of drivers leaving the industry and the licensing section isn't even open. So we couldn't, Hull in 1 year lost, I think it was 100 licensed drivers, didn't replace a single driver, and our business was at threat because of that. They've now started making changes to their conditions, which will make it more obtainable to get a license for a driver. It was costing them over £1,000 in over 8 months to get a license. And with Doncaster, they don't even answer the phone or an email to a driver, unfortunately. So it's now impossible to get a license in Doncaster. So really, we're here to work with you guys. We don't want to see out of town drivers working either. So, you know, we've had a conversation with Dave recently about, you know, we will go out and actively recruit drivers. We won't be putting them through somewhere else. We'll be bringing them to York, trying to license them as York drivers, you know, and part of the conditions, you know, if they fail in York, we won't license them elsewhere. So I like to think we're quite reasonable and nice people, but well, you guys make your own mind up.
Okay, questions for Mr. Hall then? Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I presume you've had sight of the draft additional conditions that we imposed on another operator, I think, that we thought was going to use out of town. Have you got any observations on those? I think you can probably see where the committee is going and what's been said already, and you know those conditions. Would you have any concerns about them?
Not particularly on first glance. I think there's a topographical one at the end. I don't know how that looks, how you go about that with these drivers, you know, who we would enforce to do that, but like I say, we're here to work with you. We want to provide a good service to the people of York and surrounding areas.
Just if I may, on a point of clarification, Mr. Hall, the original copy of the additional conditions was incorrect, and there was a supplementary agenda published on the 16th, of which I hope you're aware. No, okay, yes, you put it in front of you. Thank you. All right. Councillor Waters, can we just wait for Mr. Hall to finish glancing over that?
I can't see a problem with that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Waters.
Just out of curiosity, do you actually run a taxi business in Wolverhampton?
No.
So the operator's license from Wolverhampton is merely a license of convenience. You're saying that you want to work with your taxi licensing authority, this committee. Would you be willing to let that license lapse if you were awarded a York operator's license?
Put my mic on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem that we've got is Hull especially. Hull has been decimated by COVID, and there was a lot of elderly gentlemen drivers who left the industry. So, you know, ideally, I would like to have 3 licenses, York, Hull and Doncaster, and not have a need for the other one. So my answer is yes, but obviously it's got to work for the whole business.
Well, this needs to be a question to officers then. As part of these conditions, could anything like that be imposed? As a condition of awarding a York operator's license, that you were looking when the term of the Wolverhampton one was up, we make it a condition that it's allowed to lapse.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm going to involve Sandra in that one from the legal point of view, and then if you want to comment on the operability of that idea. Thank you.
Chair, my advice is that I don't think that would be a reasonable and proportionate condition to impose. Just remind members is in the context of an operator's license, the consideration is whether the applicant is a fit and proper person to hold a license. And members need to consider as well is that the additional conditions are being imposed in the context of, or being suggested in the context of what is a lawful situation is cross-border hiring. So it's not unlawful. So I don't think it would be a reasonable condition to require an applicant to give up another license in another area in order to be granted an operator's license by this authority.
Is everybody clear about that? Yeah, okay, thank you. Do you, David or Leslie, do you want to make any other comment on that?
No, Chair, I just have to agree with the legal advice there.
Right, Councillor de Gaulle.
Could you, I'm just trying to compare what's in our pack with the additional stuff which we've just been handed. I can see there's some reordering of the conditions, but if you could just explain what's changed in the latest version, would be helpful.
I think there was one condition in there, councillor, which mirrored condition A and then was taken out. So the top condition, it was agreed by council at the time, which I think it was condition D. Bear with me a second, I just check.
Condition D has become.
Yeah, it became A. I think it got amalgamated into one.
New condition D is condition E by the looks of things here.
85. Yeah, members, condition A was changed with regards to the wording that on page 85 is at condition D. And then the condition A has been removed. I believe that's correct. on the new proposed conditions that are on your table. Oh,
Yeah, just for clarification,
condition D.
condition D was removed in the old ones. It was amalgamated with condition A because it was the 3 years in relation to the safeguarding test.
Are you okay with that, councillor de Gaulle? Right, okay, councillor Garland.
Chairman, given that we've been assured that everything is in order, and I do understand where councillor Waters is coming from, but unfortunately we're stuck with that situation, and I don't think it's going to be a problem here. I'm prepared to move that the licence be granted.
Thank you, councillor Calvin. I don't know if councillor Mully wishes to speak first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I appreciate officers providing us with these proposed additional conditions, because I think they know what sort of concerns we have as a committee and have tried to alleviate some of those concerns. But I'm just a little bit concerned that condition A, slightly counterproductively, might discourage an operator from trying to get local drivers through the York tests. I think we've heard from the applicant today that their intention is that their drivers that operate in Hull are licensed in Hull, and their drivers that operate in Doncaster are licensed in Doncaster, and drivers that are operating in York would be licensed in York. But I'm just worried that having a condition that says that they can't use a driver that has passed the York knowledge and safeguarding tests discourages drivers from even taking the York knowledge and safeguarding tests when they could drive in York if they're already licensed in another local authority. So I was just wondering whether we could consider some slightly altered wording, saying that not to use any driver that hasn't either passed or has booked on to the York local authority knowledge and safeguarding tests or something like that instead. Whatever it is.
I'm a bit confused because it's the wording I'm reading says that it's would not use someone who's known to have taken and failed the test.
Yes, so my concern is that disincentivizes drivers from even attempting to take the test when they could go and pass a test in Wolverhampton, for example, and still work in York and not even bother even trying to pass the tests and completely evading our standards that we want them to meet.
I think the aim of any change to that condition would be to encourage local drivers to take the test, whether they've failed it once already or not, to take it and to become a qualified, in that sense of the word qualified, member of the team of drivers available to the public. Is that what you put in mind, Councillor Manning? Okay. So, Mr. Hall, I think you'd understand why that condition might, if you like, encourage more drivers to come in and not be discouraged by the wording of condition A on the supplementary conditions you've received. So the suggestion, I think, is that we'll get some wording sorted out to cover that and include that as an additional condition between A and B on the supplementary that you've got in front of you.
I think the main concern from reading between the lines is that.
Reading between the lines, I'm guessing you don't want somebody who's failed a test in York to go get a licence elsewhere, circumvent everything and come back to York. You know, that's not our game. We're not.
You put that much more briefly than I.
That's not what we're going to go and recruit drivers who haven't been taxi drivers before. We know the markets these guys are working in, and we're going to bring them to you, get them through, and then better the service in York, because it's been pretty terrible from what I can see.
I think what's helped is that what Councillor Mully suggested would help you in that regard. So
Well, I don't understand the point. I'm sorry, maybe it's my lack of intelligence.
No,
and old age, but I don't understand what the problem is.
well, I think,
I'm not being difficult. I just
it's
don't
okay.
understand it because I think like I think the condition A is quite clear in actual fact, but I might be misreading it.
Or I'm not explaining it right. It was a bit rambly, sorry. Just, if they're trying to recruit new drivers who aren't currently licensed taxi drivers, you know, trying to bring in new people to the trade who've never done it before. We want those new drivers, if they're going to be working in York, to be licensed in York and have passed all of York's knowledge and safeguarding tests, because
Still think different things. That's the test. But that doesn't mean to say that the necessary license for it. I mean, I agree with you.
yes.
entirely.
So for a taxi driver to work in York, they have to have the driver and car and operator all licensed in the same local authority. So ideally, we'd like that to be York. My concern is that because this is an operator that also has an operator's license in other local authority areas, a driver could go and get their driver license in Wolverhampton, for example, but then still work in York for this operator and not ever attempt to pass the York knowledge and safeguarding test for fear of failing it, because then that would disqualify them from working. Whereas if they don't take it, that wouldn't disqualify them from working.
basically, condition A, I'm not going to commit myself on that one, Councillor Galvin, because I might be nearer behind you than you think. I think what happens is that condition A excludes somebody. I'm sorry, I'm speaking for you, David. You speak.
Chair, I think there is a little bit of suggested wording that I've just come up with, which could be that unless the driver has subsequently passed the test or has booked the York safeguarding and knowledge test. So if we add in there that they were on the booked part as well, so they were attempting the test as part of that process, I think that would be reasonable.
You are, good, okay. In which case, can we leave the exact wording to be determined very shortly between officers, chair and vice chair to fit that supportive condition, and we'll move forward with the motion that you just put, which is to propose approving a license without additional conditions. Now, that was your motion, was to do that. You need a second. Councillor Mason, seconded. This is for 1 year. Bearing in mind that we have a statutory requirement to change the licensing policy, and that is currently being discussed. It will be no more than statutory and some workable changes from within the authority. Right, okay. Right.
Sorry, just to clarify, if I may, before you put anything to vote, I think it's option 2, isn't it then? To grant
Sorry,
for a year,
yeah,
with modified
conditions.
additional conditions.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry that I ran ahead of myself slightly there. Okay, on that basis, is everybody happy to approve that? Members? Agreed? Okay, thank you for that. In which case, Mr. Hall, you've had a successful evening. Thank you very much. Yep. I'm told that Councillor Myers is on his way. I will be here in a couple of minutes. Could we have a very short intermission to allow for him to travel, and then he can take part in the next item? Shall we make it 5 minutes from now? Is that okay? Yeah. The 5 minutes, the 5 minutes to 3 minutes since. And I'm going to restart the meeting, Councillor Waters. I'm going to restart the meeting and just draw members' attention to the procedure that's outlined on page 1 of your full agenda pack. The second bit of that, paragraph 7A to H, is the procedure for dealing with the taxi licence application, which is what we actually did in the first half of this meeting. And I'm sorry I didn't draw that to your attention. We move on then to agenda item 6, which is an application for a private hire operator's licence in respect of Unit 1, Heritage Park, Outgang Lane, YO19 5UP, in the name of Bilal Husain Iqbal, and it's trading as Dash Private Hire. David, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a private hire operator's licence application for the premises, like you said, at Outgang Lane. Again, it's got to be determined on its own merits. The same legislation applies in relation to this case as did the previous one, which is that Section 55 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act allows for the grant of an operator's licence for the period of 5 years or lesser, as such be determined. And again, that in February 2021, members of this committee determined that licences should be issued for a maximum of 12 months as a result of a review of the taxi licensing policy. Annex 2 of this report provides planning permission, which is in place for the operation. The premises at the moment is in operation as an auto repair garage, which will also have 1 or 2 rooms from that operation used as the private hire operator's location. Same legislation applies, which is that in 1996, the council adopted the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, and the policy was put in place in October 2019. The operator in this case does hold an operator's licence for the City of Wolverhampton Council. And the Deregulation Act, which amends the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act under Section 55, does allow for that subcontracting of bookings. For the avoidance of any doubt, such practices are considered lawful, and the operator should not be considered unfit purely on this basis. As before, similar situations have arisen, and Annex 4 of this report, there are conditions or additional conditions which are attached to other operators' licences within the York area. Council shall not grant a licence unless they are satisfied that the applicant is a fit and proper person to hold an operator's licence, or the applicant is an individual that has not been disqualified for any reason under any immigration status from operating a private hire vehicle. The applicant in this case has undertaken all the relevant criminal record checks and submitted documentation in relation to this application. I can tell you that the applicant has declared that in 2022 his private hire driver's licence was revoked due to a mobile phone offence. That application was appealed and the decision was dismissed by York magistrates. Annex 5 of the report provides a map showing the location of the premises. Annex 6 of the report provides details in relation to complaints from the 12th of December 2019 to the 12th of December 2022, which are recorded on the public protection database in relation to that members might want to consider regarding some parking issues at that location. The complaint does actually relate to parking issues surrounding the garage premises in relation to reported taxis. Annex 7 provides legal extracts regarding the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act. I can also say, since this report has been produced, we have received a couple of complaints in relation to parking around that location. We've included details in relation to the complaints. The complaints are regarding the premises, including the pavement and verged areas that have been used by parking issues in relation to vehicles. The complaints span just over a period of 1 year. And that's a submission for this operator's license.
Okay, thank you, David. I've got councillors Mason and De Gorn to ask a question of the officer.
Thanks, Dave. I'm looking at the application on the iPad, so I've not got the page numbers, but there's a bit that says registered company details. And then it says, has the director or secretary previously applied for any operator's operator license? If yes, give details. And it says no, but clearly they must have had operators licenses if they've had other businesses. I think you said they've got Wolverhampton license, did you? Yeah, it's the actual application. If you go down, it's second page right at the top. It says registered company details. So we're saying that Mr. Iqbal's never applied for an operator's license for any other company. Is that what it means?
I think it's within the York area, is that, councillor? I think there is disclosure in relation to on Annex 1, first page, that it discloses that he does hold an operator's license with another authority, which is City of York and Wolverhampton.
Just it says any operator license. What other operator licenses could he have applied for?
He could have applied for any without throughout the country. Oh,
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
But he said no.
yeah, that's correct.
But what about York? Is York Cars not an operator? He's not.
I don't think this is the same applicant.
Okay, fine. I think so. Apart from it's wrong, because he obviously, apart from it's just, is it just an error on his part? Then you think, or if there's a Wolverhampton license?
I think he has disclosed that he holds a Wolverhampton license on the first bit. Has the applicant granted an operator's license? I think it's an error on his part.
There's a bit about has any applicant had any application for a local authority granted or renewed? Sorry, I was thinking that was just a bit about it being taken off him. Okay. Maybe it's just a form that just kind of duplicates it, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor De Gorn.
It was a question you've Annex 6, you referred to complaints held by public protection. And you mentioned the premises is used for a repair business as well as a taxi business. I mean, just looking at the complaints, there's obviously one of them at least could well be a repair vehicle parking on footpath with no plates. So from this catalogue we got here, has it been established how many of them relate to vehicles that are responsibility of the hire, taxi hire, and how many are from a repair company?
From the complaints which are historic on the system, they would all had the word or mentioned the word taxi or private hire in them at that point. That's why they've been catalogued tonight. However, it was appreciated that there was a repair business at that location as well, which they may have been under repair, but we wouldn't know fully whether the vehicle was in for a repair or whether it was merely parked there in relation to some other issue.
So basically we don't know what proportion of this list relates to a taxi operation.
Yeah. Matt and then Councillor Waters.
Yeah, councillor, it may assist as I looked at the complaints. So all of those complaints have some element of a taxi included in them.
But what we don't know is whether they are there for visiting the garage or there for some other reason. That we don't know. But all of those relate to taxis. So we have had some other complaints as well relating to vehicles that don't have taxis in them. They've been excluded from there. So all of those complaints relate to taxis parked around that area.
Councillor Waters, then Councillor Wells.
In terms of complaints about parking, of taxis, vehicle repair operations taking place in the public highway, there could quite easily be complaints submitted every single day of the week. The reason that there aren't at the moment, or the reason that those complaints stopped when they did, was because the expectation of residents and other businesses nearby was that the taxi operation, having had its operator's license revoked, would shortly be ceasing. And of course, we all know what happened there. What has subsequently happened is the business next door has had enough of the situation, packed up, and that's up for sale. The Yorkshire Local Councils Association, just a bit further down the road, they also packed up and relocated to Tadcaster. The other businesses that are trying to get up and down that narrow section of road are absolutely fed up with the situation. So I think the first question that needs to be asked tonight is this an additional taxi business that's purporting to get an operator's license to operate from that base, in addition to the York Wolverhampton cars operation that's currently causing all this chaos? And then for those of you that sat on area planning that actually approved this taxi business to operate from there, I really do think that you need to realise what went on there, in that there was quite a large car park associated with Ainley's, as it was at the time, which is now Heritage House. And when this application came in front of area planning, nobody from Highways Development Control had actually been out and seen it. That actually worked off a Google Earth photograph that showed the whole car park. What they didn't show was there was metal security fencing had gone up, separating the office parking from the garage and taxi parking. So in effect, there is no parking for taxis on this site. There's not enough parking for the garage repair operation to operate as it does without spilling out onto the public highway. If another operator's license is approved to work out of this base, it's going to be complete and utter chaos.
Yeah, Leslie.
Chair, sorry to interject on this, but I just want all members to be very, very clear. This is the first time the licensing authority has had an application for a private hire operator to operate out of Outgang Lane in Osbaldwick. We know we've received complaints with regards to licensed vehicles parking in the vicinity of the repair garage, but we have never issued a private hire operator's license to operate out of Outgang Lane. Planning have granted planning permission, but we've never, this is a full new grant application. People seem to be thinking that they're already operating out of there. They aren't. We have not issued Outgang Lane an operator's license. That is what is before you today.
Thank you, Leslie. You should make a further comment on that, Councillor Waters.
Well, if that's the case, then the current operation from that base is unlawful. And quite honestly, furthermore, very soon after planning permission was granted, one of the stipulations in that planning permission was that it would be there would be no parking up of taxis to operate from there, and that once a month there would be taxi training and up to 10 drivers would be expected to be there. Now, that was tested very early on when we had a great long line of taxis way away from the site down Merton Way. And when questioned, it was a taxi training course. So presumably, they've been operated from there. They currently operate, and the operation presumably is unlawful.
Councillor Melly.
Do we know if it's this company or a different company that's operating from there without licensing, being properly aware of it? Like, is it something we can actually take into consideration when considering this application, or is it a separate company that we can't consider today?
From what we can establish, there's no operation, i.e. acceptance of bookings at that location at this present time. That is the operation for a taxi and private hire operator's license, is the acceptance of bookings at that location. This is the first application for that location. We are aware that there are other operations which are separate to this, taking place from elsewhere within the district, which are lawful. Can I also, while I've got it, just raise a point on page 105 of the pack, that the operator has suggested that they wish to operate between 1 and 10 vehicles at that location.
Councillor Galvin, and then you can come in, Councillor Waters.
I'm trying to think of the planning. I'm fairly certain, and I stand to be corrected, that the application was for a taxi training centre rather than. I can't.
Sorry, a booking office and a training centre.
I know there's a training centre. What I was coming to, just popping the booking office on one side. There's no need or no requirement for a license to operate a training centre. I can't remember whether it did include an operator or not. I accept if you're telling me that that was the case, then I won't argue the point, because I can't remember. But so be it. I mean, where we are at present is that it appears one way or another that it is alleged then perhaps that illegal activities taking place by way of taking bookings. No? The allegation is that it is currently being used, and tell me if I'm right or wrong. You could tell me I'm talking a load of nonsense. You won't cause me any offence whatsoever. I often do. I've lost the thread now, but I think you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, councillors, we're not aware of any bookings being taken at that location at this present time.
Thank you.
Councillor Waters, if I can just, before you start speaking, the application, the only planning application that we have details of is on page 109 of the agenda. And that refers to an application for a change of use of first floor from former builders yard offices to taxi business. It doesn't say taxi training business, it says taxi business.
You're right.
But then over the page on page 110, it says under condition 4, group training shall only take place at the site on a maximum of 2 days per month. So, and shall be attended by a maximum of 10 people at any one time. Now, this application was received on the 20th, in 26th of May 2020, and I don't see it being granted. Have I got it wrong?
Right.
I don't see a date on which it was granted.
Chair, Chair, on bottom of page 110, the planning permission was granted, dated 18th of September 2020.
Okay.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just summarising what you said earlier on, Councillor Waters. There's been, since September 2020, there's been queues of vehicles waiting for group taxi training on a regular basis, which really constitutes some infringement of probably this planning permission and certainly road traffic regulations. Is that right?
As I said earlier, you could have a complaint every single day of the week, but if I refer to condition 5 there, this current application is mentioning between 1 and 10 taxis, and this is the situation we've got now when it's supposed to leave space for 5. Now, what is worthy of mention is there's been a subsequent planning application to actually move the taxi booking office along the building, in effect. When the parking situation and the how do I put it, misinformation that was given to planning committee the last time has been highlighted, that application, I think, became an embarrassment to Highways Development Control, and the applicant withdrew it a matter of weeks ago.
So the extant permission, is that what
Yes,
we've got in
yeah.
front of us?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So again, how would you fit 1 to 10 taxis onto the site without permission,
I don't
as it's
know.
been requested today?
Perhaps one might assume that the ward councillor might have protested and complained to enforcement. If this had been
The
regular situation.
ward councillor made this very clear at area planning, and the ward councillor was ignored. The ward councillor subsequently took it up with Highways Development Control and found out why there'd been the recommendation they had in terms of parking, which was a very serious mistake in my view, and that's why we've ended up in this state. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got councillor Mellett and then councillor Mason.
I was on the planning committee when we considered this planning application, and we had long conversations about parking and verges and movements coming and going of office staff working in the operator's office and movements of taxis and that sort of thing as well. And I think as a committee, we were pretty clear that it was only going to be an operator's office. The only people, apart from when there was training, the only people who were going to be on site were the operators and associated staff. And condition 3 is that the taxi office shall be conducted as a control room only, and that no facilities are to be provided on site for drivers. Well, you can read the condition 3 for yourselves. I think the applicant for that planning application is different to the applicant for this operator's license, but they still would need to abide by the planning conditions. So, this application that we have before us is, they say they want to have between 1 and 10 vehicles. We don't have anyone from highways here to talk to us about parking and whether this site has the capacity for that. But is that relevant when they would still have to abide by the planning conditions anyway?
Councillor Miller's finished, councillor Mason, and I don't know whether councillor Waters has finished what he wanted to say.
Yes, they would have to comply with the planning permission. That is what's in force for that premises. So whoever operates out of there would have to comply with the requirements of the planning permission. Just to make all members aware, it's quite common practice with regards to private hire operators that the operator base may be a small office somewhere, and that operator may be operating 50, 60, 70, 80 or more cars. It isn't common practice for all the cars that work for that operator to be expected to return to base at any time, really. And now that we're in the modern way of everybody communicating via an app, etc., text messaging, however it may be, there's even less consideration to expect every vehicle that works for a private hire operator to return to base at any time. It doesn't work. If we have that in York, you wouldn't be able to drive down Queen Street because all of the cars that work for Fleetways would be blocking Queen Street. You wouldn't be able to get down Cumberland Street because all of the cars that work for Streamline would be blocking Cumberland Street. So it isn't common practice for all cars working for an operator to return to base.
Can I just pick up then? Councillor Miller, have you finished your point? Right, okay. Was it Councillor Mason? I'll deal with you and then Councillor Waters, if need be.
Thank you, Chair. It obviously says 10 or up to 10, but I presume that means 10 York licensed to go with its York operator's license, that doesn't mean I couldn't subcontract to another 50. Is that fair? And I suppose, you know, we heard from the other operator saying about his Layerthorpe office and not having any, you know, not needing cars to go there. Maybe the odd pickup from the office. Can't imagine many people are going to Outgang Lane to order a taxi unless you live in Malton.
I think as well, councillor, it's in condition 3 of the planning that there should be nobody at the premises.
So what I suppose, why is this volume different to any other taxi operator in York, do we think, in terms of the amount of complaints we're getting and the amount of cars that are going to that base when we're not seeing that with other established operators?
We're unsure at this time why that is.
Sorry, hang on a minute, Councillor Cameron. Do you want to come back, Councillor Waters?
Well, just a question for the officer then.
Hold me a sec, John.
In terms of planning and public protection, then who's actually going to enforce whether there's 1 to 10 cars on the site, taxis? Who's going to enforce that this space is left on the site for 5 vehicles? What overlap is there between planning enforcement and yourselves? What resource is there to actually police any of this? Because as I say, if you want, you can have a complaint every single day of the week and it'll all be provided by photographs. There's enough businesses down there that contact me daily.
In relation to what the applicant has provided in his application, 1 to 10 vehicles, that would be enforced by the licensing department. Any breaches in planning would need to be looked at from a planning side. We would work closely with planning in relation to that. For any application in relation to a private hire operator's license, we work closely with that operator to ensure compliance within the conditions that are attached to the grant of that license.
Yeah, thank you. Understood. Councillor Galvin.
Yeah, I was just,
And then Councillor de Gorn. And if Councillor Waters wishes to expand in a limited kind of way, then we can move on from that.
this business of 10 vehicles, that's condition 4 on the planning. It's to do with the group training.
I think that's the number of people, isn't it?
Pardon?
That's the number of people in a group training session.
Yeah, well, yeah, one would assume that, yeah. But I think planning conditions are enforced by planning and not licensing. I mean, you know, we often get this issue with noise and this kind of thing. Ultimately, Chair, and I've often thought about this, the final arbiter, were we to turn it down, of course, will be the magistrate's court.
Yeah, that's possibly true. Was it Councillor de Gorn next and then Councillor Waters? And then I want to come back to to Sandra Brannigan.
I just wanted to clarify, it was a little rolling back a little bit on some of the conversation, but there's clearly planning consent with these conditions for this location, but I'm not clear. It's been stated that there isn't currently a private hire operator's license for this location. Or if there is, it's in a different name or a different operator. Can you just clarify that particular point?
Yeah, there's no private hire operator's license been granted for this location.
So in terms of if there are complaints to licensing about an operation taking place without a license, wouldn't that have been dealt with by enforcement through licensing, not planning?
I would have guessed
just
so.
what's happened with that? You know, we haven't got a record of number of visits. We've got a record of number of complaints to planning, but I can't see detail of complaints to licensing about an unlawful operation.
Yeah, can I come in here? So the definition of what an operator is doing is in paragraph 14 of the report, top of page 97. And an operator is very specifically doing these things in the course of business, making provision for the invitation or acceptance of bookings. So it's invitation or acceptance of bookings at that premises. Top of page 97, it goes on to, yeah. So there have been no complaints to to public protection about the invitation or acceptance of bookings for private hire vehicles at that premise. I need to make that clear. There have been no complaints of that nature. What there are is complaints about taxis parking illegally in that vicinity. And the taxis parking illegally in the vicinity are the complaints that you've got detailed on your papers. Hopefully
Just to finish,
we complaints about the provisions of invitation acceptance of bookings at that vehicle. Other council services.
so if a complaint was about taxis parking illegally, then that would be either a highways or a police matter, basically, is what you're saying. Okay.
Chair, sorry, may I just, I'm not sure whether there was any suggestion that taxis are parking illegally. Councillor de Gorn, my understanding is that there is a road which is unrestricted, no double yellows. It's a highway where people can park, including taxis. So I'm just concerned about the suggestion that there is illegal parking in the vicinity.
So if there's no parking restrictions, then it'd be a question of obstruction, which is a police matter, basically what we're saying.
Well, okay.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify that point. So there are some complaints of taxis parked on the verge, on the pathway, etc., etc. Yeah.
Okay. I know Councillor Malley wishes to come in, but I want to deal with you, Councillor Oral, now, and then. Pardon? Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
It went off again, about taking bookings at that office. Do you ever get complaints about any other offices? Are there any complaints of that nature about taxi booking?
Dave, do you want, Dave might have a better handle on these complaints than me.
There has been complaints that have been passed to us in the last year in relation to unlawful activity for private hire operators, which have been investigated and found to be not correct. So it's not about that location, it's not about this operator, it's not about this applicant, but we have had complaints come to us as a council that they suspect that operations are taking place which are unlawful, and we've investigated those.
Yeah, that's a booking.
At either a booking office or a registered address. So it can be, in other words, it can be an applicant or somebody with a vehicle that's working from the home address and taking bookings, and we've investigated those and part and parcel, but that's nothing to do with this application.
I'm just trying to find out if it is a common occurrence that you get complaints, and I suspect it isn't. So the fact that you have no complaints about this in terms of a booking office doesn't mean it's not operating as a booking office.
I think from what the conversation that we've had so far, and stuff that David's alluded to, basically what he's saying is he has no knowledge that this is being operated as a booking office in the existing. Yeah.
There's no knowledge that it's not.
I'm not saying anything else. So I'd like to sum up the situation because.
One more question. No,
Yeah. Please ask it.
This, in all honesty, is fairly important, and Councillor Waters probably criticises the planning committee for granting planning permission. So I want to be quite certain that this time we're not always all in the firing line. Leslie, sorry. You said that a shack in the middle of a field or in a garden with an operator in and a radio is not necessarily the license. Am I right in it? That's not necessarily the licensed operator's address. What I'm saying is, as I recall on the planning permission, and it states there, I've read it once, but I've probably forgotten it, that facility was granted permission but not for any taxis to operate from there. What is the difference between somebody just setting up an office, communication centre, and where the operator's license is stipulated address? Would a communication centre need an operator's license? Do you know what I'm coming from?
I think I know what you mean, yeah.
I mean,
It depends on the acceptance of the booking. So if they had a telephone line which was into that communication centre where members of the public could phone up and make a booking for a vehicle, then that premises would need an operator's
thank you,
licence.
that's all I wanted to know.
If that telephone line was another premises within the city which had an operator's licence, then that is classed as
I
lawful.
understand, thank you.
Okay. Well, we have a number of, they're not necessarily contradictory, but certainly contravening arguments here. Councillor Millett, let's deal with your point, and then would like to come back to Sandra with a more general statement of yes or no and where we go.
Thank you, Chair. I think my final question for officers is just, so in the application, it's page 105 of our papers, it says, please state the number of vehicles to operate from this company, and they've ticked 1 to 10. And then the kind of standard conditions, condition 24, says the maximum number of vehicles that may operate from the licensed private hire booking office are detailed in this license. Are they referring to the same thing? Is one, like, when it says operated from an office, does that mean literally the vehicle operated from the office, or does it mean operated from an office, the vehicle could be somewhere else? But I've not explained that very well. I'm just wondering if those two numbers are the same thing, or if they're different things. If one of them is the number of cars that the operator has wherever they are, and one of them is the number of cars physically at the office, or if they are referring to the same number.
That would be the maximum number of vehicles that can operate through that operator's license. So they might have 5 vehicles operating on a day shift and 5 vehicles operating on a night shift, but collectively it's 10 vehicles operating through that operator's license.
So is that question, the application and that condition 24, both referring to that number? Neither of them are referring to the number of vehicles at an office?
No, that's referring to the number of vehicles that we would put on as a condition on that operator's license, that they can operate up to 10 vehicles at that license.
Okay. It says, please specify exact number between 1 and 10. Have they done that?
I think that's to be determined, councillor, at this present time. So we would look at 10 vehicles being the maximum.
So if that number is detailed in this license, do we have to decide that when determining the license today, or is that determined at a later date?
Members have to bear in mind that this is a new application and therefore a new operator. So they could be thinking at this stage, we're only starting off with 10 vehicles, but at a later date, they might, depending on how the operation goes, that could potentially increase. So which of course they would have to come to approach us to agree to an increased number. So if members at this moment in time stipulated a maximum of 10 as what they've indicated within the application.
Can I just pick up on my question is going to be to Sandra Connolly. In the situation is at the moment, we have an application which has to be determined. I will point.
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, we have an application which has to be determined.
Yes.
By what date does it have to be determined? By the close of business tonight?
That might, Chair, that might be a question to your licensing officers. I don't know whether there is any special time that this application needs to be determined by, whether there are statutory timescales for determining taxi license applications.
There isn't a statutory timescale for determining a taxi application. Within our taxi licensing policy, we do say we will do it as quickly as possible. And if it's coming before committee, we'll do our utmost to do it within, is it 30 days?
And this application was received on I'm slightly lost with the paperwork here.
We received it on the 1st of December.
Received it on the 3rd of December. The 1st. Okay. Right, okay. So the point is we're not limited by the statutory requirements that apply in other areas. Okay. Councillor Mason, is it a quick one?
It's a question.
Is it a quick one?
Yes.
Right.
Just going back to that point, why would we ask them to specify the numbers of cars they want to do it? We specifically say for that one, please specify 1 to 10, and then we do it. Why? And then they just tick. Why would we say that's acceptable or not acceptable if we specifically, why, you know, trying to get to the point of why do we ask and why that they haven't stated it is acceptable that this is classed as a complete application?
I believe the applicant is not in person at this meeting, but I believe they are joining us by phone. So that could be a question members ask the applicant.
Can you hear us, Mr. Husain?
Hi. Following the procedure is that the applicant, if he wishes to, gets an opportunity to present his case first, and then members have an opportunity to ask him questions. I don't know whether he wants to present a case or is just here to answer questions, but.
Sorry, Mr. Iqbal, if you're on the phone, we'll come back to you in a few moments, but we need to settle 1 or 2 questions at this end first. Can I ask you, Councillor Mason, if you've got your point answered?
No, but I think that's the idea of asking the applicant, but.
Right, okay. In that case, we'll ask him in a minute. Sorry, Councillor Waters.
Well, I'd just like to ask the officers then, what factors do you take into account then when determining how many vehicles, how many taxis can operate from this base?
It would normally depend on whether there are conditions specified in the planning, whether there are significant complaints in relation to anything at that premises, and also what type of systems that the applicant is using, whether it be a silent system, i.e. booking systems, such as the other application that we've heard today.
Would you carry out a site visit then, for example, to look and see whether there is actually parking space within the curtilage of that property? Would you carry out random site visits to see how well it's being used at the moment?
We wouldn't at the moment because it's not licensed, councillor, but once the operation was licensed, there are processes in place to ensure the conditions attached to the grant of that license are being correct. Also, they're all correct and the operator is operating correctly as per the conditions attached to the grant of that license.
So the current level of complaints and the current situation, would that be a factor in your determination? Because quite frankly, you couldn't put 5 or 10 toy cars onto that site, let alone.
I'm not clear that
taxis.
we're considering question of other complaints that already exist in this application. It's something you've introduced, Councillor Waters, but we are here to determine an application and not to consider what the situation is elsewhere. If that's got to be dealt with by way of an infringement process of some kind, then it should be done through the appropriate enforcement team. And that's up to perhaps the ward councillor to make the necessary complaints.
If that's the case, why have we had the complaints history shared with us?
I'm sorry?
If that's the case, why have you shared the complaints history? Which all relate to parking, if you're saying that's irrelevant.
Well, the complaints history we've had shared is probably, is it 10 or a dozen complaints over a period of 2 years?
it's either relevant or it's not relevant. That's what I'm trying to get. You've just said it's not relevant.
Well, Councillor Waters has introduced an additional complaint, which he says should be taken into consideration. My point is that the complaints that we do need to take into consideration here are those listed in the papers. Is that clear? Is that agreeable?
Well, it clearly says parking, I suppose. So I'd probably say yeah, it's an issue, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. We're in danger of getting sort of somewhat off track here. Councillor Waters, if you've got some helpful comment to make, it'd be great. It would be good.
In fairness, Chair, I've explained why people virtually gave up submitting complaints. They gave up in anticipation of the operator's licence being revoked.
Yes.
We all know what happened there. Now
You've
we're in this situation. You can have a complaint every single day of the week. And I'd just like to respond to what Councillor Galvin said. I'm not blaming area planning. You were seriously misled that day.
Okay. Well, so let's just get this clear. We're not here for a question and answer session. We're here for some helpful statements, helpful comments and opinions from members, rather than if you like what I might call a torrent of complaint. So Leslie, you want to say something?
Just one point for members to take into consideration, even though I take on board what Councillor Waters has said with regards to the planning permission, but you do have planning permission before you today that has been approved by this authority, and that planning permission does say that there is parking for 5 vehicles or taxis from that site. And that is a document that has been approved by this authority. So that's saying that there is parking for 5 vehicles on that site.
Okay, so going back to the application then, sorry, Councillor Miller, you want to say something? Please do. You ask your question, please.
Yeah, so I appreciate this is a question about planning and you're not planning officers and you weren't there. But condition 3 of the planning permission says that the taxi office should be conducted as a control room only, and there's no facilities for drivers waiting for fares or between shifts, etc., etc. And then, as you've said, condition 5 says that there is approved plans for parking and manoeuvring of 5 vehicles for taxi use, and that should be retained solely for that purpose. I'm just wondering why there's a need for taxi parking if people won't be there during their shift or after their shift. Is it because people share vehicles or they rent vehicles from the company? And is there people leaving cars there at the end of their shift that someone else then uses next? And if so, is that something that we need to consider when looking at whether this is an appropriate application? Because if there isn't parking on, if there will be taxis on site, but there isn't parking available for them, that presumably would have parking impacts on the wider area, because those taxis will be parked elsewhere where there's parking pressures. But I know that was a bit of a long-winded question with multiple parts to it, but I hope you've kind of got the gist of what information I'm trying to get.
The first time I looked at the planning permission, it confused me why we've got one condition saying there should be nobody on site, and then a couple of conditions down it says there's parking for 5 taxis. I think they do contradict each other personally. And there is nothing to stop members of this committee determining that that can be an operator's base, and that vehicles that could be there for other purposes, getting repaired, etc., but vehicles don't return to base.
Do people share vehicles? Does there need to be some sort of base for people who, like, does the operator own vehicles that drivers rent, for example? Does there need to be somewhere to keep vehicles, or does every single driver own their own vehicle?
On this application itself, we're unknown at that point. It's an application in relation to a new operator's license for 10 vehicles. In relation to other operators, some operators can rent vehicles out and own vehicles. Some vehicles can be used by dual drivers, so it's operated through the day by one driver and then another driver picks it up on the evening. So that can take place through various operators, but we're not aware of it in this situation for this new operator's application.
Okay, Councillor Mason.
Just to follow up on that, Dave, where they have to say how many vehicles they will operate, could that, and again, I can ask the applicant, but in theory, that could be, they have 10 of their own vehicles, and let's say they've got 40 licensed drivers that pool, and that would still be classed as 10 vehicles. It's not 10 drivers. Thanks.
Okay, so I don't know whether there's much further more that we can usefully discuss at this point. We're aware that there is a problem of excess vehicles in this vicinity. We don't know that, or we've been told tonight that there's a problem with excess vehicles in this vicinity. We don't know that is attributable to any private hire company that we're aware of or is licensed. Right, okay. So it is actually a matter for enforcement, and it's not for this committee to discuss even, let alone to decide on. Because if it's going to be dealt with, it needs to be dealt with either by highways or by planning. Yes, okay. All right. So the question then is, has everybody got enough information to make a decision, or on which to base a decision? No, I'm aware that we've got to consider the applicant's presentation. Yes, we are. But at the present minute, have we got as much information as we can, this part of the discussion? David's going to say maybe or maybe not.
Chair, there is a little bit of guidance in relation to what's classed as the fit and proper test regarding operators. And this has come from the IOL, the Institute of Licensing.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of guidance that members, I'd like to share with members. And it boils down to a situation where would you be comfortable providing sensitive information such as holiday plans and the movement of my family or other information to this person and feel safe in the knowledge that such information will not be used or passed for criminal activity or other unacceptable purposes? And that's the fit and proper test when considering a license for a private hire operator. It's about the information provided and the use of that information. And that's what we should be considering, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I happen to agree with what you've just been saying. Okay, in which case we'll move on to the applicant saying what he wishes to about his case and members asking questions of the applicant. Is that okay? Mr. Iqbal, are you at the other end of the telephone?
I am, yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry that you've just had to listen to an extended conversation, but we needed to establish a few things before we came to you.
No problem.
If you'd like to comment on your case for submitting the application for this license and why it should be approved, and then respond to some questions from members, that would be good.
I think Mr. Cowley's made the case, so I can go ahead and answer any questions that the councillors might have.
Okay. So you're saying you're content with what Mr. Cowley's had to say in relation to your application?
The only thing that I would mention, Mr. Cowley mentioned Dash Private Hire has a City of Wolverhampton operator's license. It doesn't. Yeah, I think you guys are getting confused with York Cars, and hence me putting onto the application form that I don't hold a private hire license with another authority is in fact true.
Yes, I think. I've got on page 1 of the application form. Yeah, I've got. You've had a license refused or revoked or suspended from City of York and City of Wolverhampton. Is that the case? you've got that revoked due to CU 80?
Yes, that was my private hire driver badge.
Ah,
Not,
right. Yes, sorry. I see that. Yep. Okay. Yes, so it's not a private hire operator. Okay. And can you tell me where it says that you have only applied to York, or you haven't applied to Wolverhampton or anything like that?
at the time of submitting the application, I had only applied to York, yes.
Yes, okay. All right. I realise that's what this application is about. Sorry. Okay. Right. In which case, Mr. Iqbal, I'll ask members if they would wish to give you any questions, if that's all right with you.
No problem.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, Councillor Galvin, Councillor Dickorn.
Thanks, Mr. Iqbal. I've got a few questions, so I'll go through them all individually, just to give you a chance to reply to each one's probably simplest. You obviously said, and it is confusing in all fairness, how those questions are worded. Can you just confirm then, have you applied for any other operators' licenses? Or I think it's just operators' licenses I'm interested in. You've said about the driver one obviously been lost. Obviously, you made a statement there saying at the time of application, so that kind of gives us the impression that you've maybe applied for others since then. So if you can give us an up-to-date of, have you applied for any of the licenses historically or since this application for any other authority apart from York?
Yes, I have applied for other operators' licenses with the City of Bradford and the City of Leeds, but they were after the time of submitting the York application.
Yeah, that's fine. It just helps with the context for some of the questions. Just again, going back to the application, obviously there's a range of options. You can take 1 to 10 cars, 11 to 50 and whatever else, but it specifically says next to the 1 to 10, please specify the number between 1 and 10, and you haven't done that. So I just wondered if you can tell us what the exact number is.
Currently, Dash Private Hire has 0 drivers and 0 vehicles registered with it. I wouldn't be able to register a York private hire driver or vehicle without obtaining an operator's license.
But it asks for the number of, you're obviously making an application and you've said you'll be operating between 1 and 10. So it asks you to specify. So I think we need an answer really to are you going for the 10? Are you going for 5?
I'll go for the 10.
Super. Obviously, another concern of the committee, like you probably heard, is around out-of-town drivers. And I suppose, you've obviously gone for a small number. There obviously is concern about out-of-town drivers. And I just wondered what does your business model look like in terms of, using other authority drivers?
Sorry, say that again, sorry.
What's your business model in terms of going forward? Obviously 10 drivers is relatively small. Do you envisage using drivers that are not registered in York?
We will be abiding by the Deregulation Act. If we have the opportunity to take on more than 10 York licensed drivers and vehicles, we will obviously notify the council and get that band higher up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the next question is obviously, have you had sight of the additional conditions which the council may be or may not be minded to attach to a license that might be granted?
Are you referring to Annex 4?
Yeah.
I have, yes.
And have you got any observation on those? You'd be happy or not happy with any of those being attached to your license?
That I would be happy with them conditions, yeah.
Brilliant. And the last one was just around pool vehicles. And if you as a company were thinking about having your own kind of licensed pool vehicles?
At the moment, I don't have any pool vehicles for Dash Private Hire. It may be something that we will be looking at in the future. Just in regards to the planning permission that you were referring to about the 5 parking bays, there are 5 parking bays that are on the planning application referring to the taxi operation. So that could be staff members' vehicles. It doesn't specifically have to be private hire or hackney carriage vehicles reserved in them 5 bays. Could be the staff members, managements, booking staff, etc. allocated to them 5.
Thank you. That's everything from me for now.
Okay, I think I've got Councillor Galvin next, and then Councillor Dickorn.
Yes, for some clarification, if we take page 103, it's Annex 1. You've had, as I read this, a license refused or revoked or suspended by the City of York and the City of Wolverhampton. Am I right then in assuming that the City of Wolverhampton license that was revoked is not going to be reapplied for? I'm not quite sure where we are with this.
They are my private hire badges, which allow me to drive a private hire vehicle as a taxi driver, have been revoked. So therefore I cannot drive a licensed private hire vehicle in either district, or nor can I go out as working as a taxi driver.
So it wasn't an operator, right? Okay, thank you. Got it.
And Councillor Dicko is next.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify, as you said, the condition is that provide there is space for 5 vehicles. Are those reserved spaces, given there's we've heard there's other company operation on the same site? Are they sort of allocated spaces that can't be used by the other operators?
Them 5 parking bays are relation to the private hire license that will be obtained into Unit 1. The taxis that Councillor Walters is referring to are with a different operator, York Cars, who have their vehicles repaired at the workshop.
So those are vehicles that have got taxi signing on them, but are there for repair rather than in association with the operation. Is that what you're saying?
Correct, yes. The vehicles that are sort of in yard are for repairs.
And can I just to come back to the point the question I raised about the operation, as you said, that it's been stated that there isn't an operator's license in place at this present time for this premises. So, well, I'm slightly confused as to how the business is operating, but it doesn't have a license as an operator's license to be running from this premises.
As Mr. Cowley and Ms. Cook mentioned, there's no taxi operator taking bookings in Unit 1. Because the vehicles for York Cars taxis are parked at Unit 1, which are waiting for repair, I believe Councillor Walters is under the impression that a booking office is live in this premises. There was a site visit back in 2020 by a City of York Council officer who confirmed no operation was live.
So just to clarify, given the concerns that have been raised about vehicles parking, which you say have been mostly associated with the repairs rather than the operation of a taxi hire, how can you sort of help give some assurance to the committee about how a granting of a license won't actually increase the level of car use? Because basically what you're saying is that it's been inspected and there's no control room base there, but there's congestion, and now we're being asked to allow its use as a control centre for bookings.
So, as Ms. Cook said, an operator doesn't require vehicles to return to the base, especially with the modern day technology. Everything's dispatched through a PDA or software, as it were. It wouldn't be very economical for a driver to return to the base after completing every booking. Obviously, this base is situated in Osbaldwick. If we have a customer calling from, let's say, Clifton for them to drive back from Clifton to Osbaldwick to be sent back again is not economical for both the driver, the customer or the operator.
Sorry, so just to finish off that point, these 5 spaces that the planning consent requires to be available for taxi use, not repair. Do you have any indication of how many members of staff are likely to be at any one point in time there by virtue of the control centre being based there, which you're saying it currently isn't? So I'm just trying to understand what increased number of vehicles likely to be on site as a result of agreeing it to be used as a control centre.
Yes, so to my understanding, when the planning permission was granted, it was granted on 5 parking bays reserved for the taxi operation. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to have 5 licensed vehicles parked in them spots. Them spots were reserved for staff members associated to the taxi office, etc. Yeah, I would probably say, off the top of my head, on the current license being applied of 10, a couple of parking spaces for the staff members.
Councillor Orwell.
Yeah, evening, Mr. Iqbal. It says in the report the premises is currently in operation as a repair garage. Is that garage still operating?
Yes.
Right. So your cars can still get their car. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Waters, then Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Iqbal, your driver's licence, when do the points run out and you can then reapply for your driver's licence? Just curious.
I'm not sure about the legalities. I believe they remain on the DVLA license for 4 years. I think with York City Council, I might be able to reapply for my badges after 5. David, want to quote me wrong?
Yeah, the council policy does stipulate 5 at this current time.
Okay, Councillor Wells, then in that case.
Hello, Mr. Iqbal. Can I just ask you about the address? Because on page 104, it says that the business operating address is Unit 1, but the registered company address is Unit 2. And both of those, I presume, are dash. Is that right?
Unit 1 is the unit that holds the planning permission to trade as a taxi operator. Unit 2 doesn't. The registered company, as you're aware, can be registered at any address in the UK. It's vital that the trading address or the operating address obtains its planning application, hence why it says Unit 1.
But the registered company name at the registered company address of Unit 2 is Dash Private Hire Limited. Is that right?
Yes, that's for Companies House and HMRC.
Yeah, fair enough.
Are either of those units then part of the repair business?
Sorry, could you repeat that question again?
The repair business that does work on the taxis and everything, are they based at either Unit 1 or Unit 2?
They are based Unit 1.
Thank you.
Okay, can I just check if anybody else has got a question for Mr. Iqbal? I'll come back to Councillor Waters then, having heard nothing.
Just one final question, Mr. Iqbal. Just quite in reference to the last questions, really. What relationship has your business got with the current Gladstone Garage York Cars business?
Dash Private Hire is its own limited entity.
Yeah, but is there any relationship between yourself and your business and Gladstone Garage and York Wolverhampton Cars?
Dash Private Hire has no relation with 34 Cars Limited. I think what Mr. Counts Walters is saying, do I have any relationship to the owner of 34 Cars Limited who trades as York Cars and Gladstone Garage? Is that correct?
I was asking what business relationship, but if you wish to explore that further, then yeah.
Well, if you want to be specific on that, in regards to the limited companies, there's no relationship between Dash Private Hire or 34 Cars Limited. It's its own entity.
Okay, Councillor Mason.
I think what Councillor Waters was trying to get of is what's the business relationship? And I would presume you're a tenant, you know, or are they a tenant of you? Did you hear me okay?
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat that again?
I think what Councillor Waters was trying to understand was what's the business relationship in terms of, are you the tenant or are you the landlord? And you obviously there is a business relationship because you both don't just use the same building for nothing, or are you both tenants of somebody else?
Chair, I'm sorry, Councillor Mason, I'm not really sure where this is going.
Well, we've got a log of complaints that we've been provided for, which relates to activity at one unit, and now we're asked to license the same unit.
This is an application for an operator's license, and the considerations relate to the fitness of this applicant to hold an operator's license.
I don't understand why we've been issued with this schedule of complaints then. It's totally irrelevant, or it's relevant.
That's the officers, I'm not responsible for the officers' report, but I mean, Chair, this not, the applicant has provided answers to the extent that you consider further questions are relevant. I mean, he's not obviously not to be cross-examined.
It's not cross-examination, but you give us a schedule of complaints and clearly said they're all relating to taxes. We now realise both operate from the same premise. I don't think that's irrelevant.
Okay, can we be clear about where this schedule of complaints has originated? This is in relation to Unit 1, Heritage Way, over the past 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll put that up. Yeah, so the schedule of complaints is precisely that. It is details of the complaints that are associated with taxes around this premise, which you're being asked to license. And that's why it's included in the pack.
But can we be clear that those complaints relate directly to the premises that are the subject of the licence application? Or do they relate to Unit 2, perhaps? Well, apparently Unit 1 hasn't been operating in this context, right? Which is why I'm asking the question. Councillor Waters maybe had the answer to that, or Mr. Iqbal, perhaps.
You may wish to ask the applicant what the last planning application that was recently withdrawn was about. Was that moving from Unit 1 to Unit 2? And then you might get the answer.
So this is not, Chair, this is not a rerun of a planning.
I don't think this is appropriate. We have an application in respect of one premises, and that's what we need to consider. Councillor Duggan.
Yeah, the question which is going through my mind is we've heard that quite a lot of the complaints relate to a car repair business. What I'm not clear from the answers that we've had is whether the applicant is in some way either a director or has a responsibility for that business as well as making this application. So that is very relevant to our consideration of these complaints. Obviously, as I asked the question earlier on, you know, to what extent these complaints relate to taxis, and we've established that obviously a number of vehicles from York taxis were there for repair, i.e. implying that they were nothing to do with the applicant. But now we seem to have established that there's more than one company in these units, and I don't understand what the responsibility of the applicant is for the repair business, which is in the same premises, we've been told.
In which case, perhaps you should ask the applicant that question, although I'm not sure that it's relevant. Well, it may not be relevant, but I'm not sure.
Well,
it's
it may,
proper.
okay,
I'm not
it
sure
may not
it's
be
proper to
relevant.
ask it.
Can the applicant reassure
You're
me
asking
that it's not
questions,
relevant?
Councillor Deggle.
Sorry, I'm asking it, in that case, I'm asking the applicant to reassure me that it's not relevant, because the committee is clearly is not clear as to the relationship he has with the repair business, which has been the subject of the complaints, or allegedly is the majority of the complaints relate to repair business, not the taxis.
Mr. Iqbal, if you want to comment, we would be glad to hear from you. But my view is at the minute is that this is an application in respect of number 1, Unit 1, Heritage Way. And what happens at number 2 might be totally unconnected with it. Okay. Councillor Mason, have you got something constructive to ask Mr. Iqbal about this?
No, but just to make an observation, it says very clearly premises relating to taxes, not complaints relating to taxes, premises relating to taxes. I think that's either, maybe it's the wrong wording or not, but that's what makes me feel that that's right.
I'm sorry, could you just clarify what you said about premises related to taxes?
The log of complaints, Annex 6 says very clearly, details of complaints held by public protection about premises relating to taxes, not about complaints relating to taxes, premises relating to taxes. And that's why I think it's relevant.
Okay, in which case, if Matt can just give us a word or two, or maybe can give us a little bit more explanation about what those complaints might be about. But I'm not clear that they relate to Unit 1, not at the moment.
Yeah, so those complaints are complaints held by public protection about taxis in that vicinity, emanating from businesses in that area, which you've heard about.
So, Chair, I mean, as I see it, those complaints relate to a pre-existing current problem that have nothing to do with this proposed operator's license, because it doesn't yet exist, and there is no evidence before this committee that there is any unlawful, unlicensed taxi booking business currently taking place at the premises. So the existing car parking problems cannot be said to relate to the operation of this license, which doesn't yet exist. That's why I just was. Thank you.
That's my feeling entirely, Sandra. So I'm just concerned that we don't start labelling what's happening at one unit in connection with what we think might be happening at another.
Sorry, just Chair, just to clarify my reasoning, the allegations have been that there's a lot of problems associated with parking at these premises, and obviously whatever activity we're considering licensing is going to be on top of that. We've had questions have been asked as to whether the existing business that share the premises is continuing, and the understanding is that it is. So therefore, unless the applicant has some influence over the other business, it's likely that whatever further activity is going to add to the problems, not reduce them. That's why I'm asking the questions.
Sandra, you may wish to comment here.
Well, yes, it's just a question to what extent he can be held responsible for the existing problem that don't relate to the, you're right, the issue may be that if there is a taxi booking operation license granted, then there could be additional problems on top, but I think the applicant has explained, although there's been some evidence and some comments from the applicant about the extent to which there are likely to be additional traffic parking in this as a result of any license that may be granted. But yes, I understand the point you're saying is whether or not there would be an additional problem over and above what's already taking place, but I think that's been commented on.
All I was going to say, Chairman, can we just go back to page 125, Annex 8? There is no, and please don't misunderstand me, there is no reason whatsoever why vehicles parking, not parking, applies, as I understand it, to any of the sections A and B. This is about whether the applicant is a fit and proper person to hold an operator's license. I'm not saying about car parking. I'm not, all I'm saying is, for goodness sake, can we move on? Because we're kicking it around and covering the same ground. It is not a consideration when you look at section A and B on Annex 8. And I'm not saying it should be, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but it's not. Am I right in taking that point from? Yeah.
Councillor. I don't know, Mr. Iqbal, if you've got anything more to say. Councillor Myers here, I think, may have a question for you.
It's just really brief, and actually Councillor de Gaunt summed it up very well. I thought made a good point about why it does appear, why it is relevant, the questions that the committee is asking. And I just wanted to clarify that, Chair, the repair business operates from Unit 1 and the application is for a private hire vehicle operator's license also from Unit 1, so it's the same unit. So the questions about that relationship between the businesses I thought was valid.
I understand that the repair business operates from Unit 2. Is that right, Mr. Iqbal?
No, the repair business operates from Unit 1. Unit 1 is a large premises which consists of a workshop and offices.
Right, so the offices are being repurposed for use in connection with your application.
Correct. The upstairs office will be in connection with the taxi operator.
All right. Can I ask you directly, Mr. Iqbal, do you hold a position of general management or control of either of the other two companies, which I think you've mentioned, which occupy the same premises?
I am a manager for York Cars Taxis, yes.
But not for the repair company?
No.
Right, okay. I don't think I've got any other questions to ask that are not prejudicial, so I won't ask them. Councillor Mason.
Can I just ask a question to the officers in terms of what Mr. Iqbal said about the different locations, about having I suppose, an operating base and a licensed office. So your control room's at Unit 1, but your registered office is at Office 2, Unit 2. That's totally normal or allowed. Legal, maybe is the word, legal. I've been involved in businesses where your registered address is where you've got to operate from. So that's what I'm just checking.
Yeah, in relation to the bookings, it's all about the booking and where the booking is taken.
Yeah.
There are other companies throughout the UK which have a registered booking address and an operating address and have a head office somewhere else. So it is perfectly lawful to do so.
I've got examples out, John, so I was asking.
I think unless anybody Sorry, thank you. I think unless members have got any other questions for Mr. Iqbal, Mr. Iqbal, if you want to comment on the, sorry, Councillor Hook, do you want to speak?
No.
Okay. Unless members have got any other questions, which they don't have apparently, then Mr. Iqbal, if you want to sum up what you've covered in response to the questions, that would be great. If not, I think we can move on from here. I'll leave it up to you.
No, I'm happy to leave it at that.
Okay. I just want to say one other thing. It may be that a slight change to the condition A in your additional conditions needs to be made in order to encourage drivers to take the York knowledge and safeguarding tests. Because at the present moment, condition A says that if it's known that they failed it in the last 3 years, then they're basically not eligible. So in order to encourage more drivers to be licensed in York, we would want to change the conditions to cover that. I'm not seeking to agree the exact wording with you, but officers do have some wording for it. And the purpose of my comment is simply to say that it has been our intention in a previous case to introduce those words, and Councillor Melly may wish to propose that those words are used. If not, I'm willing to propose that those words are used from the chair. Somebody second that? No?
You're not getting it.
Thank you, Councillor Mason.
Well, I'm only seconding that if we decide to do that, the wording would change. Is that what you mean? You don't mean the actual motion to move the license with those conditions? Yeah.
Okay. Is everybody happy for that decision to go ahead? Okay, right. Councillor Waters.
The quick question to the officers: is it normal practice then for, you know, if a driver's had his licence revoked, and as we've heard, it's going to be 5 years, to remain in the taxi trade by applying for an operator's licence instead?
There's guidance on this that's set out in this. There's guidance set out in the statutory standards that it's quite acceptable for private hire driver to have one licence revoked and continue as a private hire operator in another circumstance. It's got to be judged on its own merits.
Yeah, just again, curiosity. Are there any other examples in York? Just don't need names or anything, just numbers.
I'm unsure at this time, but not from what I'm aware.
Okay, Sandra, over to you.
Yes, Chair, if I may just to add to what Licensing Officer David has said in response to Councillor Waters' question about once your taxi driving licence has been revoked, is it normal to carry on? Just of course reminding members of the test for a private operator's licence is the fit and proper test. Is obviously always concerned ultimately with the safety of the public, but a private hire operator, of course, does not have any direct responsibility for the safety of passengers or other road users. And so that's why when David mentioned the fit and proper test, there's no legal definition of what the fit and proper test is, but tests have evolved. And the fit and proper test for a taxi driver, members may be familiar with, is would you trust somebody, you know, a member of your family with this person in a taxi? And the general test, as David outlined earlier, for a taxi operator is more concerned with whether or not, when in performing their duties as an operator, bearing in mind that they hold considerable amounts of personal and private information about passengers, which must be treated in confidence, whether or not you can trust that they will treat information in confidence. For example, people have gone away on holiday, your house is empty. That's more the sort of considerations that I think are generally considered that members would have in mind when you're considering whether an operator is fit and proper.
Okay, so we've heard from the licensing officer dealing with the application. We've asked questions of the officer. We've asked questions of the applicant who didn't wish to make an extended statement, and we've had one or two other issues arise along the way. I think the situation is that we need to decide whether this application should be granted or not. And if it is granted, it will be granted with a modified set of conditions, which includes the additional condition that I mentioned between A and B to deal with allowing drivers who have already failed the York test to either pass it successfully or to book on to take it again, and to be included in that operator's list of driving individuals. So the third possibility is that the application is refused. So I'm going to leave it now to members to propose a motion as to whether it should be approved with the modified condition that we've talked about, or refused, or unless members feel that it should be approved with the set of conditions that were actually in the papers, which we've agreed need to be modified to deal with the renewal of a failed test applicant. Then basically we need a motion to deal with one or the other of these two choices. So if need be, I'm willing to move from the chair, but over to you, members. Councillor Waters.
I'll quite happily move option 3 on the basis that, as well as data protection duties and administration duties, if you've got an operator's licence, you should be setting a clear example to the drivers that you're running the business with, and showing a flagrant disregard for the rules of the road, and now being banned for 5 years from actually holding a taxi driver's licence, I don't think sets a very good example to those that's working for the company. And on that basis alone, I would say not fit and proper, and that is the basis for refusal.
Okay. Councillor Orr.
I'll second that, Chair. I think there are too many doubts for us to be sure that he's a fit and proper person to have an operator's licence, as detailed just now.
Do members wish to comment on that before we move to a vote on it? Councillor Legorn.
Just, I mean, it might be helpful during the course of that questioning, there was some information which, as far as I can see, was not referenced anywhere in the report in terms of the relationship between the applicant and York Cars, which, as we've heard, their vehicles are maintained there, but I've made a note that in answer to your question, it was stated that the applicant is a manager of York Cars. Now that information, I think, given the history of this committee and making decisions about their application, is relevant. And if that has not been provided by the applicant, it does again raise this question in my mind as to whether or not it's a fit and proper person, because we've got other concerns which understandably the committee would have about the applicant, which are not being made clear in the application or in the application process, to my knowledge. I mean, obviously I stand to be corrected if I reference in the report.
Yeah, I think in relation to the legislation in section 55, it asks whether there is any direct directorship or not just being a manager of a company. So they wouldn't have to disclose being a manager of a company, but if they held a directorship or anything with any other company, then that would be relevant in this situation.
I can just sort of say that for me is the point which brings into question the issue about fit and proper person, just because of that, the history, within this city and concerns about the licensing arrangements for that particular company. And this is another company which obviously has quite a close relationship with that company, which we weren't aware of.
Councillor Kelvin.
I'm struggling with this. I come back to this definition of a right and proper person. And I do understand and I accept quite willingly that at the end of the day, if it's turned down, we're not the final arbiter and it can go to magistrate's court. And I suspect that magistrate's court will look purely at whether they consider that the person is a fit and proper person. And I suspect that car parking, etc., will not feature in a magistrate's decision. Pardon?
But we haven't mentioned that as a reason for refusal.
I'm not suggesting for 1 minute you haven't mentioned it, but I know what's behind it. And I'm struggling because I do have an element of sympathy with those who say that it would appear that there are vehicles parked everywhere in outgoing lane with the name taxi or private hire. And on the other side of the coin, I'm struggling with the fact whether that's relevant for a new application in the premises. And I'm quite befuddled by it all, quite frankly, as to which way to go. And I don't like abstaining. I don't believe that we are paid to abstain.
Yes. My feeling is that we need to bear in mind the views that might prevail after a previous decision that was made by this committee, which was appealed. And what happened at that point. That's all I'm going to say on it, but I think that's a legitimate consideration for members to bear in mind. So I'm going to put it to the vote. Are you going to contribute to a debate on this, Councillor?
No, I just wanted one sentence as a reply that decision made by that committee in relation to a separate business at these premises was made on the basis of legal professional opinion that was procured at high cost by this council that we all listened to before we made that decision.
I'm not clear how relevant that comment is. I'm simply asking members to bear in mind. So let's put it to the vote. Those in favour of the motion to refuse, please show. Those against? 3. There's no abstentions, I think. In which case, I'm sorry, Mr. Iqbal, your application is refused.
Thank you very much.
I've got no other urgent business. So with that, I'm going to declare the meeting closed. I want to thank the officers who've supported us throughout the last year, certainly the last 6 months of it where I've been in the chair, our officers who deal with licensing, and our technical team who deal with webcasting. Members, thank you also for your part in this year's proceedings, whether it's been virtual or face-to-face. Thank you very much. Thank you.